if there is a deity who spent 14 billion years meticulously planning all these things to lead to exactly to us, if there is that kind of deity, then he would never have said some of the things in the Old Testament. Some of those things in Deuteronomy 13 sounds like a crazy person on Facebook.
Well, welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club. We are a monthly gathering of believers and skeptics, respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. We've been doing this for about, I think this is our 6th year now. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our other co-founder, Bill Cluck. My name is James Walker. I'm president of Watchman Fellowship, a evangelical Christian ministry focusing mostly on apologetics, defending the Christian faith in the area of interfaith evangelism. So we focus a lot on other faiths and religions and trying to share Christianity with other faiths. Also interested in atheism, agnosticism. And we have been doing the book club as a way of focusing on important books. And we usually alternate. We do an atheist book one month, the Christian book the next month. We're not going to do a book this time. I'll tell you about what we're going to do this month in just a moment. But I want to take just a few moments and go talk to you about what's coming up in the next couple of months. April will be our Christian book month. And so we're going to be Thursday, April 4th. We're going to be talking with Doug Groteist. Doug has been a longtime friend. I remember interviewing him for KCBI radio back in, I think, the late 1980s or something. So we go back a long way, and Doug is going to be our guest. We had him scheduled along with one of his co-authors last year, but that ended up being a conflict, and we had to cancel at the last moment. So what we're having on April 4th, Doug has his PhD from the University of Oregon. And he's been a long-time professor of philosophy at Denver Seminary in Colorado. He headed up the Apologetics and Ethics master's degree program there. He's published numerous articles in journals such as Religious Studies, Philosophia Christi, Inquiry, the Journal of Evangelical Theological Society. And he's written numerous books, including a textbook on Christian apologetics, a book called Truth Decay, a book, one of his books, Philosophy in 7 Sentences. But on April 4th, Doug's going to be joining us and discussing his book, World Religions in 7 Sentences. Now, that will be our next book, and just watch on atheistchristianbookclub.com, and we'll get you more information on the book. What you need to know right off the bat is the first section, I believe, in the book is actually on atheism. So there's going to be a little controversy, perhaps, about most atheists don't like to be associated with religion or put in that category. Doug's not doing that, by the way. He basically, at the beginning, says if atheism is true, you don't have to worry about the rest of the book. And so he's kind of eliminating that before he gets into the heart of his book. World Religions in 7 Sentences. We will be reading more than just 7 sentences, but these are short, concise, great chapters. And the whole book is going to be fair game, but of course, there's going to be a lot of emphasis, I think, on that first section on atheism. That's going to be April 4th. And then May, we're having Jennifer Grace Bird. Dr. Bird has a BA in mathematics with a minor in education from Virginia Tech. She is also has a master's of divinity from Princeton, and her PhD is in New Testament and early Christianity from Vanderbilt. She's taught at numerous colleges and universities where her courses have included world religions, Buddhism, hermeneutics, Introduction to Women and Gender Studies, as well as feminist, womanist, and queer theologies. She'll be joining us on May 2nd to discuss her recent book, Permission Granted, Take the Bible into Your Own Hands. So this is going to be, she does, her background is, personal background is Christianity. She's kind of made a journey apart from that right now. So we're going to let her self-define, where she is now and spiritually. But it's definitely a non-evangelical look at the scriptures, at the Bible. And so that's going to be for our May 2nd book club. Then today, no book. So that's a break for a lot of us, Richard. So what we're having is our special guest. We're having Richard Suttles, who goes by the name the Faithiest Atheist. So Richard currently serves as senior intelligence analyst and liaison with the U.S. federal government. For the past almost 30 years, he's worked in many realms of the intelligence community, with the Department of Defense, with the Department of State, with the Department of Homeland Security. And from 1995 to 2005, he served in the military, the U.S. Marines, including tours in Haiti and Iraq. He has 2 postgraduate degrees with the University of Oklahoma, one in communications and another, his other degree in international relations. He's completed a counterterrorism training program at the Naval Postgraduate School. Now, Richard's focus, his career is focused on the radicalization process some people go through when they become committed to conducting violence in the interest of furthering ideological goals. So he studied the intricacies of persuasion campaigns, and these are methodologies from organizations and social media algorithms that can prompt people to become fervent supporters of goals chosen by the campaign. So this is a broad thing, everything from conspiracy theories, QAnon, things like that, all the way to the other extreme of religious radicalization and, in some cases, terrorism. So that's what he does for a living. And so as a former Christian himself, I'm fascinated in this topic. And what we deal with at Watchman Fellowship, a lot of it deals with the area of religion gone bad. Very bad in the case of illegal or even harmful suicide or murder, things like that, in the name of religion or God. And so what I want to talk about, I've gotten pushback on this as a Christian myself some, is Richard's is joining us today to have a live conversation about the question: does Christianity lead to cultic mind control? So Richard, welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
It's good to have you. And we didn't have a book, but what we did do is Daniel Ray, one of our staff, did a pretty fascinating hour and a half long interview with you. And we had a watch party last Friday at my house with several of the book club members. We watched probably a 25-minute excerpt of that, and then we've had it up for everybody to kind of watch that interview. And so, it's a little bit frightening to even ask that question. I'm going to let you give a simple answer first, because I want to get over and let Bill Cluck lead off with some questions. So, by the way that works for the club is Bill and I are going to ask a couple of questions of you first. And then what we're going to do is, if you have a question or want to talk to a perspective or idea that you want to share, if you will put that in the text, then either Daniel Ray or Brady Blevins will cue that up. Sometimes people want to ask the question, but they don't want to come on camera to do it. You can do that as well. Say, would you ask that question for me? And we will be more than happy to do that. So before I turn over and let Bill Cluck talk with you a little bit, can you give us a simple answer? It's a little bit scary to ask that question of a former Christian, and somebody who's an expert on this. So is that answer yes or maybe or sometimes? Does Christianity lead to cultic mind control?
My nuanced answer is that humanity leads to cultic mind control. There's things about our human nature that can do that. The fact that most of us are religious is the reason why so many cults have religious language, because everything has religious language. J. Warner Wallace is a person of interest, and then a new book from Glenn Scrivener from Speak Life called The Air We Breathe. It talks about, in fact, even atheist Tom Highland talks about how we swim in Christian waters. So the fact that Christianity is so dominant is the reason why so many of these cults use Christian language and Christian themes. It's not Christianity itself. And what I'm going to be talking about is going to tie right in probably to what Doug Grotheis talks about next month, which is atheists and Christians and other religions have something in common. And that's that we can all find something important. We find something that's really important and we devote ourselves to it. And you can get so feverishly into this thing that you really believe in that you can really start to not like other people or dehumanize other people. And that's where terrorists and cult kind of stuff comes into. So because of that, you can have an atheist cult, you can have an atheist terrorist. It just depends on what the thing is that they're into. And the cults especially are more about icons than they are about religion. So a lot of the cults, the icon, the person that they all love, wants it to be about him. And so there is a form of worship, but it doesn't have to be the kind of religion. It doesn't have to be tied to religion. It could just be about catering to that icon at all costs. So that's my overall answer. It's human nature. And that's why I think atheists can be considered religious, because sometimes they'll behave sometimes even more zealous than a Puritan. And so that's what it is. And overall, I think that Christianity even has some aspects to it that could help Christians not fall into a cult, especially when you have language about how we're all corruptible. We're all intrinsically corruptible, and so you could watch out for that. There's things about Christianity that I think people could use to make sure that they're not falling into that cultic mindset. That's my answer.
Well, thanks, and I want to circle back on that again. My when I first became a Christian, my background was Mormonism. I was a fourth generation Mormon, and I went through a process, a kind of a deconstruction of my Mormon faith, and this was about the time, shortly after the time of the Jonestown, when 913 people drank the poison and Kool-Aid
Yes.
and committed suicide. And I'm thinking, wow, I may have been in a religion that's not true, but I would have never done that. At least there wasn't
Right.
any kind of, but then I started thinking, well, would I have, could I have, what was exactly the dynamics, what would prevent me from doing that? And so that's why I do want to talk about this some more and pick your brain on this in the book club.
Okay.
But I'm going to let, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and let Bill Cluck have first shot at you. Bill is the other co-founder. He's a former Christian, now atheist. Bill and I just got through last Sunday doing a kind of a live Christian and atheist in dialogue at a church. So before you ask your question, Bill, could you tell us what it was like to be in the lion's den, to be in a Baptist church here in Arlington with hundreds and hundreds of people hearing you as an atheist? And you were one of the only atheists in the whole building at the time. There was a couple others, I think, but you were just about it. So what was it like to be in the lion's den there talking about a Christian and an atheist in dialogue?
Well, they couldn't have been nicer. The pastor, everyone was just fantastic. And they did say we use too much technical language like endogenous retroviruses that, I asked my doctor today, I had a doctor's appointment, and she didn't know what it was. So, this apologetic jargon, we're used to it, you and me, James. But with the lay audiences, I need to be a better communicator.
Well, I think you did an excellent job, and I don't know what it felt like when you had that many people on the other side. They were polite, I will say that, and I was a little bit afraid at one point it wouldn't be, but they were very polite, I thought, They were very interested to hear from you. And in the Q&A section, you seem to have almost all the questions. So it was they did want to talk to you and stuff. But did you have a question for Richard about this whole thing of mind control?
Well, speaking of quotes, I'd like to read you a passage from Tacitus from about the early second century. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilty and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment in Judea, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all the things hideous and shameful, all the nutcases seem to find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty upon their information. An immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as of their hatred against mankind. So, Richard, would you agree that Christianity is a cult?
Well, before Christianity became, make sure I'm off mute. Am I off mute? Okay. Before Christianity became popular, then of course the surrounding cultures would have considered it a cult, and especially if they were going to be dangerous. But I don't think that all original Christians were dangerous. I imagine that a lot of Christians that were outnumbered, and I wasn't there. But from what I understand, in some of these cases, the original Christians would take care of each other, and not go out and try to be antagonistic. They would try to survive and take care of each other. I'm not saying they were all perfect, but I'm just saying that you can have this mindset. You can be outnumbered, and you can be a smaller group, and you can take care of each other without necessarily being violent and lashing out. I know there's some books that talk about how Christianity became dominant over the first few centuries, and I know those aren't all good news stories. But then once we got to a culture where most people thought as Christians and they weren't killing each other. And I realized there were times like the Reformation Wars where they were, but in times where they weren't, then I don't think that Christianity caused it. I think it just created like a moral system for us all to use to get by. I mean, most people were Christians and they weren't all necessarily killing each other. So it depends on the situation. But in any culture, if you have a counterculture growing from within, and if they're going to be violent towards the outer culture, and they're doing things that are really harmful, then sure, that would be cult-like. But here we are now in 2024, and a lot of Christians aren't doing that. I mean, right now there's almost two Christianities in the U.S., and although there's so much vitriol between the two forms of Christians in the U.S., they're not killing each other. We're here on my street here in a rural town in Arizona. We've got different kinds of Christians living next door to each other and probably arguing on Facebook, but then taking care of each other's kids and saying hi to each other in the morning. So in that case, I don't see cult behavior.
Well, two Christians, are you talking about the charismatics and the, more the Calvinists, or are you talking about the young earth, the old earth, the dispensationalists? What two Christians are you talking about?
Right now, like on social media, I see a lot of evangelical and then progressive Christians, and they go to different churches and they call each other heretics and things like that. But then they live next to each other, and don't kill each other either. So I understand there's violence and there's vitriol and confusion. In my opinion, that's a point for our side, that there isn't a real Christianity, and that it's what people make of it. So for atheists, I would say that's a point for us. But at the same time, if they're not killing each other, then I would say that's not really cult behavior. That's it's just a mindset that they use to navigate life.
So you use this illustration of an elephant going to water. Here's my speech, okay? You said swimming that's my speech. We're swimming in a Christian culture and Christian waters. It's impossible to get away from this Christian bias. We have seminaries here in Dallas. We have like 7 or whatever. We got radio, TV. We just have all this Christian bias. And here's the thing: even smart people cannot escape Christian bias. because you
Right.
see
That's true.
some really brilliant Christian apologists. Now, William Lane Craig is trying to escape it because his book, In Quest for the Historical Adam, he says we all evolved from Heidelbergensis, us Homo sapiens, Denisovans, and Neanderthals. So he's saying the first Adam was 700,000 years ago. So he's trying to break away. But what I've seen, I mean, I've known professors that just cannot escape this bias. So how do Christians escape this delusion?
I think a lot of the work's being done for us by social media right now. Everything's fracturing because of social media, and we're all being we always have capability to look elsewhere and look at other things. And not only that, we now have Christians creating new Christianities. I've in the past 10 years, I've seen the formation of a Christianity that has to do with one man, one living man, and what he says is Christianity. And I personally know people. I realize this is anecdotal, but they don't talk about the Bible. They don't talk about Jesus. They talk about him.
Really? I never noticed.
Yeah. And that is, and if you say Christianity, they're like, yep.
Oh my God, Richard, that is so true. I was on a cruise ship and this girl had Joel Osteen's book, Your Best Life Now. And she goes, this is my Christianity. I'm going, your Christianity is a heresy. Joel Osteen says 99% of the people are good. Totally opposite in what the Bible says. All have sinned and fallen short.
And notice how big his church is. It's a football stadium every Sunday.
Absolutely.
So my answer to your question is everybody's kind of creating new Christianity now, and social media is just making it fracture. So like Catholic versus Baptist versus Presbyterian versus Lutheran, that's starting to not make sense anymore. Now it's starting to be a politician versus a prosperity preacher versus a guy in a small church who would do anything for anybody. And then you have LDS saying that they're Christians. That's not going to go away. So we're going to be forced to rebuild. This Christian waters and this air we breathe language is going to be rebuilt. And there's really no way around that. I think that's just going to be something that happens. So a new world is coming.
Yeah.
Richard, we love Bill. He may be an atheist, but he really helps us to try to keep Christianity he's only against the real Christianity. And so he makes sure he tries to correct everybody. Before he defeats Christianity, he wants to make sure you got the right one, and then he'll destroy it, deconstruct it.
Right. So, Richard, I noticed you are really reaching out to Christians. You go to Christian churches. You you argue with atheists. Are you a real atheist?
I use the word atheist to mean does not believe in deities. I don't think that I can prove that no deities exist. So some Christians say, well, then you're an agnostic. Fine. But the Merriam-Webster dictionary has began to accept this new definition that just you lack a belief in deities. So I'm using it. Plus it rhymes with Faithiest. And I really want to bring in the Faithiest because there are so many things that atheists have to accept that we can't demonstrate. So I really wanted to kind of embrace that. So I'm doing my best to reach out to evangelicals and say that you're right, that atheism can be something a lot like a Puritan religion. It's not always, but it can be. And I'm trying to find common ground there. So yeah, my biggest audience is usually evangelicals. For the organizations there's several organizations that pay me to come out and give speaking events. They're evangelical based. Christian, I'm not invited to atheist organizations.
Are you like John the Baptist crying out in the wilderness?
Right. Now they often accept me because I'll say that I honestly think that Christianity is of human origin. And so they'll accept me based on that. But then sometimes they'll say, well, we're more reasonable than they are. And I don't think that's always the case.
So here's the thing. There's things like, the Cambrian explosion, where the major phyla, like echinoderms, arthropods, chordates, suddenly appear in the fossil record in a short 10 million years time span around 540 million years ago. Mm-hmm. But there's also, which seems to, show special creation, but there's also the endogenous retroviruses where they go and integrate themselves, these viruses, into the genome of us, chimpanzees, and gorillas. So it seems to indicate a common ancestor. And I was just warming up to having chimpanzees being my cousin. Now I got to go bring gorillas into the family. So can you live with the tension of both things indicating truth or fact?
Yeah, absolutely. For the gaps in knowledge, I've always said that God of the gaps is not an insult. There's gaps. So atheists and theists have the exact same gaps. Here's the things we can show, and here's what we can't show. So it's the same gaps. And so if Stephen Meyer, who's one of the previous guests on this club, when he says I'm seeing the fingerprints of a designer, intelligent design, I don't see that as an insult. He's seeing there's just too much of a gap there for naturalism to make sense. Whereas I'm gambling that there probably is going to be an explanation. And I'll even add to this that once we do, and I think at some point we will have much better natural answers for all those gaps. Once that happens, all the theist scientists are going to go back and say, well, this is fine tuning then. The fact that this can happen. Like right now, Stephen Meyer is saying there's no way this will ever be naturally explained, and so it has to be a designer. If it is naturally explained, then somebody else, a younger scientist, is going to say the fact that it can play out like this, just stepwise, just perfectly like this, means that there's a designer with a plan. So theism isn't going to budge. The things that will change will be the theist scientists who say there's no way, stop it, there's no way you're going to find out. Once we do find out, that form of apologetics will vanish, and the new form of apologetics will be, it's so amazing that this happened that we have to conclude that a designer is out there. So I actually don't see a threat to theism at all. I just see a different type of theism once we get these natural explanations.
But these numbers, like we said in the church, gravitational constant, 10 to the 40th in precision has to be just right. The cosmological constant, 10 to the 120th, the expansion rate of the universe. If it's too fast, galaxies don't form. You know the arguments.
Yes.
So these numbers seem to be so incredible. And James, his final question was, how big, which is a great question, how big do these numbers have to be for you to leave your atheism?
I don't know that would necessarily convince me. It would just inspire me, and I would see it as amazing. And I think it's hard to determine what the odds are. Like I've seen theists say, it's 1 in 10 to whatever. And I don't know that we know. I think there's so much about naturalism that we just don't know yet. And so without those parameters, it's hard to determine what the odds are. If we don't know the full picture and we only know a limited picture, then some of these arguments about how it can't happen might just be ignorance on our part. It could be in 1,000 years, our ancestors our descendants. I always mix up ancestors and descendants. Our descendants will laugh at us and say, oh my gosh, they didn't think this was possible. How, what was it like to live like a caveman? So my thing is, I don't know that we know enough about naturalism to be too worried about this fine tuning. However, I'm inspired by it. And I will say this is my kind of backhanded answer to this. If there is a deity who spent 14 billion years meticulously planning all these things to lead to exactly to us, if there is that kind of deity, then he would never have said some of the things in the Old Testament. Some of those things in Deuteronomy 13 sounds like a crazy person on Facebook. Nothing like somebody who spent 14 billion years leading to us would ever even dream of. So if there is that kind of deity, then I think this even more likely that Christianity is made up.
Well, James in our talk a couple of days ago pulled the Pascal's wager on me.
Yeah.
So he said, Bill, if I'm wrong, then I just die and I would never know the difference and you would die. But if you die, Bill, and you haven't accepted Christ, you're facing an eternity in hell where after the first billion years, the next billion's right around the corner. And I'll let James ask it in his own way, but aren't you worried about an eternity in hell?
I do actually have a good answer to that. Should I wait for James to ask me?
Well, whatever you guys want. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll defer to James, whatever James wants to do for that.
Okay. Well, I don't think I said it exactly that way, Bill, but I can see how it could be interpreted that way. But bottom line, it was
I'm still what the Bible says.
Turning on this whole idea from Carl Sagan of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And to me, I think that is exactly opposite of reality, because even if we have no evidence, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. So you don't have to have any evidence for something to have happened. Now, if you want to say, in order to convince me, I would need to have extraordinary evidence. That's a fair question, but I still think even that turns it on its head, because if Bill is right, Bill and I are both going to the same destiny. When I die, I cease to exist, and I don't even know I'm wrong. But if I'm right, he will always know he is wrong. And so, to me, I think if you have, instead of extraordinary evidence, I'm looking for just one tiny shred of evidence, because that would be enough where there's promise and possibility here, where I know we're in the same boat in the other position. So I was just saying, back to the 10 to the 154th power or whatever it was, what number do you need? To me, you don't need that extraordinary evidence. To pursue this, you only need a tiny shred of evidence, and then see where that evidence leads. So does that make sense?
It does. And for me, it reminds me, or it kind of clarifies for me, that there's two different arguments. And one is, could there be something amazing and immaculate that's so far beyond our grasp that could be behind all this? And some sort of an agent, or could the universe itself be, some form of consciousness? That's one argument. And then another argument is, out of the existing religions that we have today, are any of those even close to, assuming that is true, is there any religion out here that even comes close to that type of intelligence? And I think that there isn't. So if someone tries to convince me that Christianity is true by appealing to the amazingness of the cosmos, I'll say, you might get me to deism there, or something like that. Maybe maybe even the 50-yard line, for that. But then if you say, is Christianity true, I'm still like in the high 90s that Christianity is of human origin, because there's too much tribalism in Christianity to be reflective of this greater cosmic being. So that's
a good answer.
That's kind of
good answer. Yeah. And in the book club, a couple of different times we've had long discussions, and I know Ken Daniels has a question coming up here, and he's brought this up, that sometimes it seems like that deism is a stepping stone going in either direction. If you're atheist and you end up becoming a Christian, that sometimes deism is the halfway spot. You don't seem to live there forever, but it's a transition spot. Or the other direction, if you're a Christian on your way to atheism, deism seems to be a stopping point along that journey. So,
right,
yeah,
a lot of Christians see it that way. They see it as one scale. So nothingness and Christianity, and then somewhere in between is something like deism or agnosticism. I disagree with that. I see two scales, and the bottom scale is there something amazing, and then the top scale is, are the religions of human origin. So when people are arguing with me about the greatness, I'm still visualizing that bottom scale, and sometimes they're thinking, well, I got him so close to deism, maybe I can get him to Christianity, and I'm like, that's not going to happen with me. I don't. For me, that's two different approaches.
I'm not sure what killed deism in the 18th century, but it certainly is not anywhere as popular as it was 200 years ago.
I think Darwinism killed it.
Darwinism, but what it did do, I thought, is it gave it's a way to be able to answer some of the arguments for the existence of God without having to buy any of the religions. So you say, okay, well, there's a God that has nothing to do with us, who may have been a prime cause, that may explain the Kalam argument. You can explain fine tuning, but it doesn't impact my life, and it doesn't line up with any of the religions in the world. So it's kind of like it answers some questions without having to embrace any of the religions.
I'll take this one step further. I think that's where we're headed. I think that's the future dominant religion, which is, you'll ask people, what do you believe? And they'll say, I believe in a higher power. And I think it's going to overtake Christianity, Islam, and atheism. I think atheism's on its way out, because there's just too much amazingness, for atheists to say, no, it's all an accident, I think that's on its way out. And so it's going to be, I believe in a higher power, which is going to be as frustrating to atheists as it is to evangelicals, because atheists and evangelicals are looking for some more detail than that.
Yeah, and you said this earlier. Is it fair to summarize what you were saying, that, yeah, God of the gaps is a problem, but so is naturalism of the gaps?
Right. Until we
don't know why, but we know it's not. We know it has to be naturalism.
Right. Yeah. If someone's like, I know a natural explanation is going to happen, then that's naturalism at the gaps, which I just said earlier. I was like, I have faith that eventually we're going to have natural explanations for things that we don't have now. And so that's faith. I believe that's going to happen.
But you
So
can do
yeah,
it because you're the faithiest atheist.
right. So yeah, I admit it. I don't get frustrated or angry, and I don't feel like I have the high ground when I tell somebody that they're inferring a designer when they can't explain it. I don't feel like I'm condescending. I think I'm adequately explaining what they think.
Yeah.
I don't feel better than them for doing that, and I don't feel like I'm being unreasonable for doing what
A
I do.
lot of our club atheists, I don't think would be comfortable with that. We could let them speak for
Right.
themselves, but it's like some of them don't even like to use the word believe. Like I believe the
Right.
7-Eleven's still open. Yeah, they don't like to even use the word believe because it has all this negative connotation with them, and a lot of
Right.
them they say that faith simply means that belief without evidence, or in
Right.
spite of the evidence. They sometimes go that far. You have evidence against it, but you refuse to look at it. So that's what faith is.
Well, and for those of you who are my age and older, you might remember like Robert Schuller being on Sunday morning, broadcasting to tens of millions of Americans, and he would say, "If proof is possible, then faith is impossible." So that was this idea about faith being and something that you need in spite of the evidence, and that the evidence would actually harm faith. That was a dominant narrative at Sunday mornings national TV. So I understand that Christianity didn't start that way, and I realized the original scientists believed in Christianity or some form of theism. So I get that, but I'm just saying around the 70s and 80s, the dominant narrative was don't look into it. You'll talk yourself out of it. Believe it because the Bible says so. And of course,
Yeah.
new atheism is going to spring from that. If that's the kind of talk that's dominant, of course, that's just opening the door for new atheism, which is what I think happened.
And I agree that I think fideism, or this idea that you believe despite a leap of faith, kind of existential, it's always been in Christianity, but I think it's always been a minority position. But
Okay.
it's certainly something that's easy. It's there, and you see it in variations of it in word faith theology, prosperity gospel. You see it with,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, Schuler, and even I think you could go to my church, and you could, if you polled enough people, you're going to find a percentage of it in any evangelical church.
Yes.
I don't think that's healthy, and I don't think that's a biblical understanding of faith. But I could see how it would give faith a bad name, and so I know Ken Daniels, one of our longtime members. Ken is a former Christian, and you had a couple of things you want to talk about. You wanted to talk about Ken. You want to unmute and talk with Richard.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Really, it's a treat to have you, and I appreciate your tone. And I think we have a lot in common. I'm married to a believer. I've heard that you are
Mm-hmm.
also married to a
I am.
believer.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't actually talk with her a lot about the subject, just to kind of keep things um, uh, even keel between us without too much contention. But
Mm-hmm.
otherwise we have a good marriage, and I basically live like I did morally when I was a believer. I left the faith back in
Okay.
2000. I was on the mission field in Africa with Wycliffe Bible translators in the country of Niger.
Mm-hmm.
And just reading through the Old Testament was really it bothered me before, but and I tried to sweep it under the rug, but it just came to a head while we were on the field. And so some of the same sorts of things that bothered you, I think, were what led me away from faith. And I went through a transition through deism for a while, and then to agnosticism and atheist leaning agnosticism, which is where I am now. Although I do have some of these book club meetings do challenge me to think about like, the fine tuning and various other things, the eternity and time and origin, the first mover, those types of arguments.
Yeah. Those are good.
Yeah.
I like
So,
those.
but like you, if I were to take those, if that were to move me in any direction, it would be towards deism, not towards Christianity. I would probably
Yeah.
put upper 99 percentile chance that it's human origin, the Bible
I'm
origin.
very close to that.
Yeah. But I enjoyed your interview with Dan that we saw. We were at James's house and
Mhm.
watched your video, and it was an interesting thought experiment. What if you were tasked to take out a baby in Austria in the late 1800s, and that baby turned out to be Hitler, and you needed to kind of save the world from Hitler preemptively.
Right.
And so your reaction was, well, you just couldn't do it. That's not you just it's not part of your moral system, or
Right.
but I wanted to push you on that and explore and understand where do you I'm not challenging you. I'm not
Mhm.
questioning your sense of morality, but I'm just asking how would you explain where you get that moral sense, and whether you think that should be a universal sense, or it is a universal sense.
Mhm.
Is it normative, or is it just a feeling, or how do you qualify that moral sense?
Man, I could talk about morality forever. We could have a whole month talking about morality, because a lot of that's in my these books behind me is how morality gets to us, and is so compelling. Um, my first answer to morality is I do think it's chemicals, and I just think it's an extra dose. So, and I think that's why sometimes when apologists and atheists are arguing over morality, and an apologist will bring up some sort of an atrocity and bring up something horrible. Um, the apologist is like, don't you see the difference between this and a preference? I've got my favorite movies over here, my favorite ice cream over here, and somebody else has a different favorite movie or ice cream, and that's intriguing, and you want to talk about it. But then there's some things over here that you would just never do. And don't you see that? There's two different. And so I think that's still part of our epistemology. I just think the stuff over here is extra chemicals. And I think morality is compelling you to move. Morality gives you extra certainty, and that gives you a framework through which to live your life. There could be some universal moral things, loving your family, understanding that babies are innocent. There could be some of that universal things. Incidentally, like when terrorists or people talk themselves out of not harming babies and saying it's okay to harm babies, that takes work. They've got to mentally say, this idea is so important to me that I'll be willing to harm a baby in defense of this idea. So in my mind, they start off by thinking that's an awful thing to do, but then something happens to them that they find as a priority to harming the baby. So my short answer is I think it's just chemicals. But when I say that, I still hate the same atrocities that my apologist brothers and sisters hate. I just think it's chemicals. I think when I love my mom, that's chemicals. When I love my wife, that's chemicals. When I love my kids, it's chemicals. However, if aliens were to come say, that's not based on anything other than chemicals, I would still take care of my family. It's not like I would say, hey, kids, you're on your own. I've got two teenage girls. For me to say, forget it, it's all chemicals, never mind. It's not going to change my mind. I'm not going to change my life. So I don't think it's a bad answer or a poor or a worse answer to say that it's just chemicals, because it's very compelling. It works. It gets us moving. So if it's an illusion, it's working, and I'm happy to be in that illusion. So I think it's just chemicals, and B, I think our morals come from trial and error in our lifetime and through society. Society sometimes will say, I don't know exactly the right answer, but I know for sure we're never doing that again, and we're never doing that again. And so we're going to try this, and we're just going to remember not to ever do that. And then maybe a few generations, they have to learn it again. But so I think morality is chemicals plus trial and error.
Yeah, I mean, I align with that myself. I'm just want to just follow up real quickly and ask, like, what do you think is the source of that distinction between the type of preference for, say, vanilla versus chocolate ice cream,
Mhm.
and the sense that torturing babies is wrong? There may be just ends of a continuum, but it feels like there's a chasm in between, and I wonder what the
Yes.
source of that chasm is, or that sense that there's a chasm in there.
Right. I would say that the brain dispensing that chemical is probably something that we're born with. Just like when you're born, at some point you're going to love your mom, even though maybe that first moment you're just confused. So I think that there's an area for your brain for some of the stuff that could be universal. It could be that we inherit it, and you have to really work your butt off to override it with something else. So it's something about biology and the way that we're, and listen to me talking, with faith, that, hand waving, something to do with biology. You could totally call me on that, but I'm okay with it. I'm happy to say that, I can't point you to exactly how that happens, but I assume it has something to do with biology. The way that my dog, you might hear my dog barking during this talk. She was born to love a human, not her mom. She was born to love a human. So for the first 3 months, she needed her mom. But after that, she was like, where's my human? And then it turned out to be me. If it had been my neighbor, she would be loyal to my neighbor. So there's something about the dog that's like, I'm going to be loyal to a human. There's something about us that says there's some things we're going to be loyal to. Maybe that's indicative of a deity. But, if I meet people who say it's indicative of a deity, I'm like, okay, that's cool. As long as they're not ISIS, as long as they're not like, because of this morality, I need to kill you, then I'm going to argue back. But if their moral system is productive and helpful, then I'm like, yeah, sounds good. Could be that. I'm much more open-minded when they're productive and healthy, living in a productive and healthy lifestyle.
But you would probably subscribe to the idea that evolution had some reason for putting that capability to have that moral sense within us.
Yeah, not only that, from what I'm learning from some of these books behind me is that our brain did not evolve towards truth. It evolved towards collaboration, but certain types of collaboration, not just I'm going to help you because you're a person. There has to be standards as to why you collaborate. But once a culture gets together and they have these standards and this loyalty and this bonding, that's what your brain evolved towards. And that goes back to the cultic answer, because what a cult feels is this intense bond that most people don't ever get to feel. And they're going to do anything for that. And another thing these books on neurology say is that your brain, once you get this intense feeling and this intense loyalty, your brain starts to create the moral and epistemic, and for the audience, epistemic is something like intellectual, and your value. It creates this value framework, like physical neural cortices in your brain, which is informing you of this system, and that's what the brain is doing, and it's doing it on purpose so that you can be part of this intense group. And again, your brain is guessing that it's gambling that this is going to keep you alive. And as we know, sometimes cults don't stay alive. But that kind of existence, I think, can be evolutionary advantageous. If you're part of a group who will drop anything for you, then you might have a better chance of getting a family and having some kids and passing on your system to future generations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I think Mike Cahill. Mike, did you have a question?
Right, I posted this thing and I thought we wandered really far, quite away from the assigned title of this talk here. So I thought it was kind of interesting that I had a Facebook post. I didn't post it, somebody else did, that said, here's what a cult is. And I was just wondering what Richard's take on that was. I posted the link there. I don't know if anybody can see that or if it's worth sharing somebody's screen to take a look at that.
Yeah, I won't be able to look at it. If somebody can read it to me, I'll listen.
Okay. It has 6 signs here of a cult. It says, number 1, the leader is always right. Okay.
Yeah.
Number 2.
You read all 6 of them, and then I'll give you
Okay, that's good. Number 2, criticism of the leader or questioning the leader is considered persecution.
Yes.
3, anything the leader does is justified no matter how harmful it may be.
Yes.
4, the leader is the only source of the truth. Everyone else is lying.
Yes.
5, followers must be blind. Followers must be blindly devoted to the leader and never question him. So all these are characteristics of the leader. Number 6, the members won't realize they belong to a cult.
Right. They'll think they're enlightened. And I know people, because of podcasts right now, there's cults all around us. However, in saying that, some of these cults won't harm anybody. Sometimes and since I work in the counterterrorism world, sometimes we'll follow somebody who says we need to do this because this podcast is telling us that these guys are awful. But when we listen to the podcast, the actual podcast host is like, these people are confused. You can't harm them. You just have to explain them. So the podcast host is not calling for violence, but he is saying that they're less than the people who follow the host. Or usually the host is worshiping somebody higher, and he presents
Right.
himself
So,
as a prophet. So,
so
so
on the post it says, does Christianity lead to cultic mind control? It
right,
sounds like from what you previously said that there's a few branches or sub-branches or whatever like that that might fit this, but
yeah,
Christianity as a whole is a lot more varied than that.
yeah, it
And
is,
so,
and it's getting more and more varied. And
yeah,
then think about Jesus. How many people say, "I just live for Jesus. It's not about me. It's about for Jesus." But when they talk about Jesus, 10 million people say that's not Jesus, and then he's like, "No, no, your Jesus isn't Jesus." So Jesus has become, because of social media, Jesus has become all kinds of things. So that there's multiple Jesuses now,
a lot of
and I think that's
individual
actually
Jesuses.
right. So I don't really, I think that's just going to get worse. And I think it's going to lead more to this. I believe in a higher power, but here, just here on the planet, there's icons who have stepped forward and said, I speak for Jesus, or I just speak the truth. It's not always about Christianity. Usually, when an icon wants to take over and have a group of people who are worshiping him, he'll take something that the group already finds precious, and then
Sure.
his job is just to equate himself to that. And he's like, I'm that. And once enough people believe that he's that, their brains will literally form these neural cortices to seeing him in that way, so that their immediate answer, whenever you challenge them with some bad behavior or whatever, their immediate answer is to lash out at the critic, defend the person, even if there's video of bad behavior, and to really get enraged, and then to really feel like this peace and love bonding with this leader and with themselves. That's a physical thing that actually happens. And at that point, there's no truth that's going to help. They're probably going to just carry that until something disastrous makes it so that they just can't live day to day.
If evolution does not necessarily select for truth, is this a predictable behavior then?
I think there's so many different variables now that it's hard to say it's predictable, but it's something that can happen. I think any person, no matter how smart or how much they're willing to watch after themselves, there are certain conditions where they could become like this. And so what I think is that it's evolutionary advantageous at certain times. So there might have been times on our planet when there were just very few people who were able to survive. And the only people who could survive were these fierce tribes of zealots who would do anything for each other. And the thing that they believed was almost, almost doesn't matter what they believed, but the fact that they would do anything for each other is what helped them survive. And we're probably descendants of those fierce zealots. So
Yeah.
it's in there somewhere. But at the same time, there's also times in our history where we had to say, look, we fiercely believe this, and these guys over here fiercely believe that. We're going to have to share this lake. We can't kill each other. If we kill each other, then we're all both going to die. And if we try to destroy the lake, then we're all going to die. So we're going to have to come up with another set of rules so that we can share this lake. There's a scientist passed away now. Her name was Eleanor Ostrom, and she was studying the tragedy of the commons, about how groups would sometimes kill each other or destroy their resources because of their zealotry. But she found groups that didn't do that. And what happened was that they just came up with these common core principles that would allow them to say, okay, here's our fierce standards, but when it comes to this other groups over here, we're going to have to defer to that in order to stay alive. So it was sort of a pragmatic new form of culture that allowed us to go from tribes to states. So
Sure.
that's also biological. So I just think that we have to have both. So right now, I think every person has both. There's situations that can make you become an occult, and there's situations that can make you become, a responsible citizen in a nation full of different cultures.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like to go back to a little previous topic about how much evidence do you need for this and that, and how long do we wait for the evidence to come in to convince us for one thing or other. I have a incredible variety of Facebook friends of all different persuasions, of different views. One of them, a Christian, posted a quote purportedly for George Wald from Scientific American, who said, how do we know life came about? Spontaneous generation has been disproved. So, but the alternative is to believe in God. And so philosophically, I do not believe in God. So I rather choose to believe this impossible thing. I actually took the trouble to look that up, and he did not say that in his article. But this was in 1954,
Right.
and there was another interesting quote from his article. He says, "Time is, in fact, the hero of the plot. The
Stephen
time,
Meyer says that.
what's that?"
Stephen Meyer says that too. Time is the hero of the plot.
Okay, well, this is a direct quote from Scientific American 1954.
Okay.
I'm reading it from there. The time with which we have to deal with is of the order of 2 billion years. What we regard as impossible on the basis of human experience is meaningless here. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One has only to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. Interestingly enough, that sounds like a statement of philosophy rather than science.
Right. I think so too.
Yeah.
That might have been that might have been Stephen Meyer's point, was that
Yeah,
a lot of these
and it
people who
is.
are
And the thing
yeah.
is, I don't think very much has changed. Okay, now I just turned 70 a couple of weeks ago.
Mhm.
So this article is 70 years old, and I'm not sure
Mhm.
a whole lot has changed in that 70 years.
Well, and for people who are interested in origin of life,
I
probably
mean,
the
for
best.
that particular basic thing, I mean, there's been an
Right.
awful lot of details. I mean,
Right.
I was a biochemistry major as an undergrad, and
Okay.
right, yeah,
So people who are interested in that, check out an author named Nick Lane. Nick Lane, simple name. He's an atheist, but he'll tell you, and his most recent book is Transformers. He'll tell you there's still a lot we don't know, and so he'll lay out,
yeah,
all the stuff that we do know, and he'll say that he does think it was natural, but he's like it's really is a lot of gaps and a
yeah.
lot of things that we don't know. So for atheists who say we figured it out, science is advanced, Nick Lane will say, well, I'm an atheist, and it hasn't. So there is
Yeah.
still a lot of questions.
This is
But
where the public
I think
face
it's
of
gonna.
science really gives a little bit of a different angle than what scientists can say in private to each other, I think.
Right.
Yeah, they say, we've
I
got
do
it
think.
figured out. And they say to each other, well, not really.
Right.
So
I
there's
think there's
big
a lot of
gaps.
science. Yeah, I think scientists, especially atheist scientists, have done a lot. But again, a lot of the scientific breakthroughs include theist scientists. So when I say atheist scientists, that's really not true. A lot of atheist scientists will take the things that we know now and say this pushes God out the window. What it does is it pushes God out of some of the stories. That I think throughout
Hmm.
our history, there's been stories about supernatural explanations that were later discovered to be natural. So I think some atheist scientists are like, okay, so stop doing that now and let's just wait for the natural explanation. That's probably not going to change until the natural explanations happen. We're going to meet theists who say God had to intervene here. And then once, as I was saying before, once we do find the natural explanation and we don't need God to intervene, then they'll say God has to have intervened in all of reality in order for it to unfold that way. And
Yeah,
I'm not knocking them for saying that, because what do I know?
right.
I don't know what
I guess that leads to the question, would there ever be any event that we could say, this is not just unlikely, but this is actually impossible? Would there be such a thing?
well, I mean, in many cases, people are there now, but it just might be ignorance. The fact that we're making a conclusion could just be based on our ignorance. Like
It
I've
could
always
be.
said, yeah, like I've always said that our understanding of naturalism could be 3% of the reality of naturalism. So we just
Sure.
don't quite understand a bunch. In fact, even right now, we're about to go through over the next 10 years a whole new understanding of biology, because in the last few years, scientists have figured out how cells talking to each other and this biochemical
Hmm.
language between cells is this whole other form of creating forms. It's not from DNA. It's
Sure.
cells talking to each other and saying, "Hey, we're going to put a leg here. We're
Yeah.
going to put a tail here." That's coming from the cells.
Right.
So there's this whole other thing with cells that we haven't even science hasn't even completely memorialized yet. So I
There's
would
an
just say,
awful lot of things out there. I
yeah,
think one thing that popped into my mind was says, are there any things that are absolutely impossible? As far as we know, one thing that popped up that we discussed a lot in this Christian book club is the resurrection of Jesus, for example.
right,
Dead people don't come to life if they're
right,
really dead. Okay,
yeah,
so then you get into the arguments about the whole historicity of the thing and all that.
yeah.
And if there's any current, um, really well documented something like that, I think that would fall into a pretty similar category. I haven't experienced that, but anyway.
Well, and I think,
there's categories of differences, I guess. Yeah.
well, like in terms of impossible, I don't think we'll ever be able to definitively say that Jesus definitely resurrected or definitely didn't. I will say that a lot of Christians now are pushing more miracles, and more people are having stories about, this thing couldn't have happened, and the doctors, condemned this person, not condemned, but they said this, there's no way, and then the next day they were fine.
Yeah.
There's going to be probably more and more of those stories, whether they're true or not. But once we have enough miracles, then I think future generations will be like, oh, so this other guy raised from the dead? Okay. Yeah. Here, this other person did this other thing. So at some point, I think the miracle of the resurrection will have less leverage than it does now, as more people are coming up with miracle stories, which may or may not be true. I'm just saying that in order to deal with miracles and coming up with more miracle stories, I think some Christians are working against the plight, not realizing that once you have enough miracles, then what's a resurrection, more or less?
Yeah. And I'm guessing that those who come up with miracles are not really trying to do a really philosophical argument against atheism. They're just saying, hey, isn't God good that he did this?
Right. And my thing for that, whenever I run into somebody who has a miracle story, I'm just so happy for them that happened. But then I temper that with the fact that I know a lot of families, and then there's even, records of families who put everything they had into trying to save the kid with prayer and,
Sure.
and put all their heart into it, and it didn't work out. And in some cases was worse. There was one family that the whole family joined hands at the hospital to try to save one child, and they would just determine to do it, to pray in the circle. And the doctor said, hey, there's like a weird flu going on here, so don't bring the young one. And the family was like, no, we got to bring the whole family. And of course they lost the young one too. So they lost one because of, the wreck or whatever, but then another one because of this flu that the young one never would have had if they hadn't kept bringing him in for the circle. So, these miracle stories go both ways. There's these stories that are inspiring, and then there's stories that are devastating where the miracles didn't happen. So
Sure.
I try not to say that miracles will convince me. I'm just happy that they happened. But then you're going to have people who, whenever they hear a miracle story, they're going to just shut down because they have a story that went the other way.
I think it would be a logical mistake to generalize from one experience or a handful of experiences to a general principle.
Right.
On that.
I think we had a question also from John Moorhead, long time friend of mine. So, John, can you unmute and you have a question for Richard?
I do. Oh, goodness, I thought someone else was going to read the question, but I appreciate the opportunity. How you doing, Richard?
Hey, John, good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again. Hey, I wonder if you could elaborate. You said something recently on your Facebook page about how you're not so much interested in persuading others to be atheists, but you were more interested in kind of a diplomatic way of engagement with others. Could you elaborate on why and what that looks like for you?
Yeah, well, and that's really kind of my coming to Jesus moment as an atheist was I see so many people at work, or I'll read, by the time when a terrorist is trying to justify actions or whatever, by the time it gets to me, it's already been translated, and I can just kind of read what people said. And usually the events are long over. But I read the worst of the worst of people trying to convince each other to kill each other. Like they're so dug in on their ideology that they want to kill each other. That my big enlightening moment was I've got to do something about this. I've got to try to take it the other way, because I see that same kind of language with politics and religious people and atheists, the way they speak to each other. And I see so much of that I'm like, I'm going to try and change the language and change how we talk to each other. So, I mean, that's one reason why I did Faithiest Atheist, is because I'm like, okay, I don't think that Christianity is true, but I think I can have a lot of Christian friends and, be immersed in Christian culture and be okay with that. And then at the same time, I think I can defend why some people don't believe without thinking that they're godless or that they don't care or that they're nihilists or postmodernists. So I just try to come up with a better way to deal with each other, and then to explain why people get so dug in. But because a lot of people are dug in, like for instance, last night they had James White and Leighton Flowers debate each other. Those two guys are dug in, and they're going to die with their different beliefs of Jesus. They have two conflicting beliefs of Jesus, and I know Leighton Flowers and James White's here in Arizona with me. They're going to die with that, and they're going to pass on that ideology to future generations, and they're going to write books. They're dug in. Now, at the same time, they would never harm each other. In fact, they would run into each other's houses and pull their kids out of fires. So they're dug in, but they've also got this other ideology about respecting and loving each other. So I'm like, there's got to be a way to have your ideals and still be able to have your conversation. They had a heated conversation, but they would do anything for each other. And then you have your James White tribe and your anti-James White tribe and your Leighton Flowers tribes who are like, oh man, my guy dominated. The other guy's like, well, I don't know what you watch, but my guy dominated. They're all dug in. But if I can have them not tell each other that they're anti-Christians or that they're actually worshiping Satan or that they don't understand the Bible, and I can just say, okay, there's something we're missing, but I still love you as a brother in Christ. If I can see more of that, and I do see a lot of that, I'm not claiming to be responsible for it, but I'm pushing for that. I'm pushing for that other kind of language, just because I hate to see people saying you need to die because you don't understand Scripture, you don't understand God, you don't understand logic or reason, or if you live your way, then you're going to collapse into some sort of evilness or nihilism, and that's why everybody has to avoid you and embrace me. I'm trying to say, okay, you can have your standards, but try to stop short of turning into somebody like ISIS. So I know a lot of people who talk sort of like ISIS, but I don't think they're heading towards ISIS. But I'm trying to say, at some point you can turn that off and try to see the humanity in some of these people who believe differently than you.
Well, I appreciate that, Richard and James. Thanks so much I think this Atheist Christian Book Club is a great idea. It's good to see you guys doing it.
Thanks, John. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're a long time part of Watchman Fellowship for many, many years in ancient history now, I guess it is. But could you take just a minute and tell everybody what you're doing now about your organization?
Yeah, these days I'm heading up the evangelical chapter of the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy, which also goes by the easier name, Multi-Faith Matters. And then a few months ago, I stepped into the executive director position for that. And we have chapters in different religious traditions. And hopefully I have successfully recruited Richard to take on the directorship for a chapter for the nuns and secular humanists, so that we're still concerned about our deep differences, and yet we want to have these kinds of cordial, respectful conversations and still be able to work together for the common good. So that's what keeps me out of trouble.
That's a good thing. Richard, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Pew Research report that just came out a month or so ago that talked about the rise of the nuns, and a lot of the atheists took that and celebrated. A lot of those nuns are deists or theists. A lot of the people who say nun, N-O-N-E, says, I still believe in something. I just don't think that it's any of the versions of religions we see now, but in something. So I do think that atheism is a small part of the nuns, and I would like to be part of that chapter that says, okay, we're the N-O-N-E-S, some atheists, some agnostics, some people who believe in something, and maybe later atheists and agnostics will separate from that. But the Pew Research gathered them all together, and I think a lot of atheists misunderstood that.
Last year, we interviewed Ryan Burge, who wrote the book on the nuns, and we talked to him about the General Social Survey and just what it meant for the rise in statistical analysis. And he made the point that the GSS, which is what the nun statistics were based on, was always done in person. And he said, and it was prior to the pandemic or during the pandemic, that it was the first time it went online. So I wondered if not the anonymity of it had something to do with the pandemic itself had something to do with the rise in that. But as you said, Richard, as Ryan said, a lot of those nuns are not atheists. It's not necessarily a victory for it. It's basically leaving mainline established denominations. A lot of spiritual, non-religious or deistic or theistic in some capacity. Hard to say, but mostly Gen Z, just kind of swimming around. But anyway, we have a podcast, Talk to Ryan Burge, great conversation. He was fun to talk to. All kinds of stuff about the nuns if you want to know about that.
That's great.
When you get a chance, Daniel, can you adopt that, a link to that podcast?
I sure will.
Thanks so much. So yeah, I like the idea that, when you have interfaith dialogue in which you're trying to say that there's no difference between what we all believe, I think that could be disrespectful to all the groups. But to recognize the difference and still try to have community and find I think you'll find is you agree with a lot more than you thought you did, and you can have relationship, community, friendship, and if you're going to have some kind of outreach, as Christians have the Great Commission that we're supposed to be doing that, well, what better way than organically just getting to know somebody and they see your life, you see their life, and you can compare notes with it. So, and I like that idea of that kind of religious dialogue, and or in the case of atheism, non-religious dialogue with those who are religious.
Yeah, I've always said, whether you're atheist or no matter what religion you believe in, you're going to struggle between having standards for behavior and mindset that you think are important, and then you're also going to have empathy for what other people are going through, so that you don't think that your standards are the be all end all, or I hate you. You can say my standards are important and I'm determined to live by them, but at the same time, I understand people have different experiences and different circumstances. And I'm going to try not to hate them for having that. And by saying that, I'm not claiming that, everything's subjective and you do whatever, because I don't think I don't think doing whatever is the answer. I think you should have standards. So I actually see a pluralistic, no matter what happens, I see a pluralistic set of cultures where everybody has their standards, but they also have these common core principles with other cultures where they're like, as long as you abide by these common core principles, you can have your standards and we'll have our standards, and we'll watch each other's kids and, obey the same traffic laws and, like that. So that's what I'm pushing for.
Richard, what you say sounds so good. Have you ever thought of starting a cult?
Yes. Yeah. Anybody wants to start worshiping me?
Really, it just makes so much sense what you're saying. It's
you could call it Suttles Chemicals.
Right. There we go. And I also think
Subtle
that,
chemicals.
Some of the icons who became corrupt, and there's been some Christians who've done this too. I actually think they went into it as good people with noble intentions, but I think humans are corruptible, and I think if you have people who you won't let the world correct you, then you start to trust your gut, and then you start to have more and more gut reactions that you should be taken care of, and then you have these people competing to take care of you, then pretty soon the world can't correct you and you become even more corrupt, and you just kind of take this group way over here, and that could last for generations, and it could lead to all sorts of atrocities.
So short of starting a cult, we had Frank Turek on, and we said, oh, can you do that? He goes, oh, you got to write a book. So until you write a book, you're not on that level, is what he was saying. Have you thought of putting these great ideas down into a book?
I actually don't like the future of books, and I don't know that I have the discipline to write a book. If I were to meet a publisher who's like, no, we're going to find a way, and I'm going to help, I'm going to help you get organized, great. But I almost think now if you have a book, you would have to update it every year, and it's hard to do with paperback. So it's almost always going to be something more like a website. So yeah, I don't really know the future of books. I do want to change. I'll tell you this. I want to change help change how we talk to each other. And I don't want to be famous. So I hope that in a few years, there's more people like me who are, maybe had even more military experience or even better at presenting themselves, and, have more money for better organizations. And then I'll just fade out. And then people could be like, haha, you used to be on all these shows and now nobody wants you. I'm fine. I'll take care of my, kids and grandkids. I don't have grandkids yet, but, eventually I might. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with fading out because I'm actually worried about fame. I think fame can create its own problems. So for me, it's improving the situation, not necessarily about me. So far, I hope I don't become corrupt.
Hey, Richard, I would like to ask you, what ultimately caused you to walk away from Christianity?
Yeah. So when I was about 17 and I had the questions, the usual questions about the Old Testament, I always, sometimes apologists today will be like, oh, well, you're bringing your own views onto this Old Testament language. And I'm like, well, remember, you said we swim in Christian waters. You said this is the air we breathe. So these morals that seem violated when I read some of these Old Testament verses, those are Christian ideals. So, yeah, I do feel like they're being violated, but I don't think that it's just my postmodernist, me-centric, morals that are being violated. I think those are Christian uh, standards that are being violated, and so it bothers me. And so at 17, I would have these questions, and the adults in my church, would say, "Oh, well, they were really bad. They were warned and warned and warned." And then I'm like, "Well, what about the kids?" And like, "Well, it's just better sometimes to just get the kids up in heaven." So they just, immediately went to heaven, and that was the best way to handle it. And I was like, these aren't really great answers. And then also, I was handed an apologetics book, which was Scaling the Secular City by J.P. Moreland. And my youth pastor gave that to me, not knowing what apologetics was. He just thought it was he heard that a smart guy wrote a book to shut up people who had questions. He didn't realize how much J.P. Moreland encourages doubts and research and things like that. So he actually regretted giving me that. So from all this tension, from the different responses that I was getting to my questions, I began to think, what if this is something that we just do to ourselves? We come up with our own answers, and then they become, sacred to us, for lack of a better word. And then we just go with that. And so it took about 5 or 6 years until I finally just said, okay, I think religions are just something that we do to ourselves. And I was about maybe in my mid-20s by the time I came to that conclusion. And I'm in my mid-50s now, almost. So I'd say for about 30 years, that's what I've thought.
Thank you so much for that answer. So I guess ultimately you never found an acceptable answer or something that seemed to fit then for, we'll just say, the actions of God in the Old Testament.
Yeah, I did find an answer, but it's an atheist answer. And this was studying radicalization and how people can find something so important that they would start to talk bad about others to such a degree that they would say, kill the babies too. I mean, I see posts like that on social media now where they'll say, you got to get rid of them all, stop them now or they're going to keep growing.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I just
go ahead.
I just want to say, I think that's what happened. Like in the verses in the Bible or in the Old Testament where people are like, wipe them out to include the babies. I think that was the same mindset, that their ideas, whatever it was, usually worshiping other gods. They're like, we've got to make that so awful that we will stop at nothing to just wipe it off, and it just becomes like a disease rather than people. That's my explanation for why those verses are on there. And I've noticed there's
a specific example. King Saul, when he comes before God and God says, hey, did you wipe out those Amalekites? And he goes, yes, I killed the women, the children, the babies, the usual stuff, and the camels and so forth. And he goes, bleep, bleep. He goes, did I just hear a sheep, Saul? And Saul goes, yeah, gosh, I didn't kill the sheep. And God goes, did I not tell you to kill everything? I mean, it makes God look like a psychopath. Am I right?
Yeah. So what I think happened there was that the person who wrote it honestly believed it and projected that onto God, and it resonated. It resonated with enough people. They're like, yeah, that sounds like what a powerful being would do. He would smite them and just get rid of all of them. And by the way, there's Christian scholars now who will also say, when you get to verses like that, like Greg Boyd, I'm gonna name drop Greg Boyd, in his book Crucifixion of a Warrior God, he's like, when you get to verses like that, that that's not something that Jesus, who died for us, would say. So you can immediately say this was a tribal person bringing in his tribal views, and it made the cut. It shouldn't have made the cut, and you can still say that the Bible is divinely inspired.
Christ, the greatest.
What's the question?
I think somebody had just played something or something of that nature. I don't think that was anyone speaking.
Well, you read Paul Copan's "Is God a Moral Monster"? Have you?
Yeah, I have read that, and I've actually got to spend the weekend with him last year. So yeah,
was that compelling to you?
He's got a different view than Greg Boyd. He's like, something like that did happen. It was just hyperbole as to how bad it was. So he's like, there were some atrocities going on, but it was hyperbole. It wasn't as bad as what the Bible says. Greg Boyd is saying it just didn't happen. And so Paul Copan actually takes issue with that. Paul Copan's like, no, it did happen. It's just not as bad. And Greg Boyd says, no, none of that happened, and you should know better, because that's not the kind of thing that Jesus would tell people to do.
Yeah,
one last follow-up.
One of our guests on the book club once or twice, I think we've had him on. Not on that topic, though.
Well, one last follow-up on that, just to try to understand. So how do you then approach scripture or really anything that anyone says hermeneutically? Because I know that in some of these cases, like I would agree with Copan. I think there's some of these verses that are quite obvious it's hyperbole, because like the very next verse says, and don't intermarry, which that's obvious that they're using hyperbole in the verse above. But with that said, how do you approach this though in terms of dissecting the text? And that's not just the Bible, but I mean the rest of your work that you do.
In my view, you have different competing cultures with, and like I was saying before, everyone has like a moral and epistemic value framework. And so a lot of these cultures are different moral epistemic value frameworks, and they're competing with each other. And the best way to compete with each other is to memorialize what those values are. And so I see the Bible as a framework of that. It was some cultures who said, it's not just orally repeating it. We need to set it down, almost in stone, but in some kind of way that we can carry it forward. And now social media is doing that with websites and 10-second videos on TikTok. Those are becoming the frameworks now. So I just think this is a reflection of culture. And then I go back to that, that kind of God that created the universe over 14 billion years. He wouldn't use a book, and he wouldn't start with one culture, and he wouldn't have the culture spread to the world. He would do the whole world at once. So that's why I think that Christianity is a reflection of people, not what a creator of all of us who loves all of us would do. The book wouldn't work. It would be what would get my attention is if all the cultures eventually came together and everybody's book matched. Then I would be like, there's no possible explanation. Everybody has a different book with the same set of rules. Then I would be like, there's got to be, at least aliens. There's got to be some outside force that was aware of all of us who would know to do that, so that by the time we all met up after tens of thousands of years, would have all these same rules. But for each religion to grow geographically with the limitations of travel that we had, makes it look like, to me, like all the religions are of human origin.
Richard, you and I have been talking a lot since our interview. Mm-hmm. And I jokingly said I probably wasn't going to ask you anything tonight. So I'm going to ask you a question we've already talked about. And so I already know what you're going to answer, but I think it's an interesting response. We were talking about, and maybe you didn't see it because we've been texting a lot. But we were getting into the neighborhood of God getting everybody in line, and I was trying to clarify that your general objection is that if God, then everybody would be on the same sheet of music, in some sense. And I think I was understanding you.
Yeah, so that's true.
The question that I think to be fair to you, I don't think you saw this in the text because we have essays in our text.
Right. We text it a lot.
I'm not going to fault you if you didn't see this, but I had mentioned, or maybe I didn't even mention this. Maybe I thought this is what I wanted to say, but I'll just ask it. What is it a matter of, like, God could get everybody on the same page? I think I think we agreed about that.
Yeah, I absolutely think if he created the whole universe and all of us, he knows how to get us all on the same page.
So you have this small little hymn in Philippians chapter 2, verse 10 and 11, I think it is, where one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord.
Case in point. Yeah.
Okay.
On that day, according to that, everybody will be on the same page. Nobody will have any questions. We might be upset. We might be devastated, but so we all agree with that passage and that mindset. We all agree that all 8 billion, assuming it's going to happen soon, if it happens later, it could be 10 billion.
Well, however, the people, it's going to be more than 8 billion if it's everybody that's ever lived, right?
Right. And then we'll all be on the same page. And, some people will be like, oh no, it's too late. But still, we'll all know. So we all agree that he has the power to do that. So and that's why I'm saying I have faith that kind of creator with that much power would step in so that we wouldn't have all these different factions, sometimes killing each other. So it's not, sometimes arguing, sometimes murdering each other. It seems like that creates confusion, and it seems like a creator wouldn't have to deal with that. Okay.
To follow up with what Brady was saying, and I know this is something that we didn't talk about, but you had mentioned it tonight. In the beginning, you had said that there's some things, and I know in our interview you said there's some things within Christianity that can help people stay out of a cult.
Yes.
And I don't think we ever got. No, we did. We talked about the Sermon on the Mount a little bit. We talked about Jesus and judging people and taking the plank out of your eye
Right.
before you deal with the speck in your brother's eye. We did talk
Right.
about that.
Yeah, like if you notice something wrong with someone else, take a minute and think about, hold on, am I doing this? And inevitably, when I do that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this too.
Yeah,
So
that's
one
we
thing that you
agreed
guys have.
a lot there. But you said tonight, I was interested to expand this a little bit more. In Luke 24, Jesus is on the Emmaus Road. The disciples don't even recognize him, right? And why are you walking and talking like this, looking sad? And the disciples are like, I think it was Philip, don't you know what happened in Jerusalem this weekend? He was probably the only one who really knew what happened. But Luke 24:27 says that beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them himself concerning all the scriptures concerning himself. So that little phrase there, Moses and all the prophets, includes Deuteronomy. Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned at the beginning some of the weird things that God seems to say, or maybe people are putting words in God's mouth, in Deuteronomy 13. So if Jesus is affirming Moses, which would include Deuteronomy, then he seems to be affirming those words of Moses within that specific chapter.
Right.
How can would then Jesus be affirming the stuff that you think is crazy?
Right. If that's what
okay, so what would be your advice to me as a Christian to hermeneutically look at the differences there between, like, I want to know that there's something in Christianity that could help me stay out of a cult, but then it seems like Jesus is affirming the language of what you think is cult-like mentality in Deuteronomy 13. So what do you think? How can I fix that? How can we fix that?
Well, I would tell anybody, we all believe in something that's really important, and we start to prioritize what's more important. And so whenever I see the language about you have to kill babies, the person who said that is thinking this ideal is more important than even the life of the infants, and you have to wipe it out like a disease. And so I would just encourage people to not think of other people like that. Whatever Jesus said. And remember, I think that the Bible is a reflection of how people thought rather than an actual reflection of a deity named Jesus. So I don't take it seriously like that. But if I meet somebody who does, then I'm hoping that they would say, I believe in the Jesus that died so that we wouldn't have to be like that. And when he says he affirms the Old Testament, he's not talking about that. And then Greg Boyd would say he's definitely not talking about that, because it goes against Christ crucified to say something like that. So I would push Greg Boyd on someone who's like, well, we got to do it because Jesus confirms to do it. And hopefully I would win that conversation. But then again, remember, I'm thinking that it's of human origin anyway. So I don't know that there's a sacred answer. I would just hope that I would be more compelling than the person who wants to harm kids.
So your position, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your position is there's some good in the Bible, and there's some stuff that we should discard.
Right.
We shouldn't pay attention to.
And here's the hard truth. Everybody does that. Everybody. James White reads this and he's like, I'm not doing that. And then somebody will be like, well, why? And he's like, I'm not doing it. And then he'll say, because in the Greek version of the Hebrew, we all do that. And then, some people will say, well, we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to discard that. So first of all, everybody discards parts of the Bible. So then I would just say, try to discard the things that talk about, start with the easy stuff. I'm definitely going to discard the things where he said, or somebody said that he said to harm kids. The rules about how to build a house might not be the best ways to build a house now. So like I say, a lot of people are very pragmatic. They have the Bible, but they're very pragmatic about it. So we're all pickers and choosers. And I know when I grew up in my Baptist church, our preacher said, don't pick and choose, but we all pick and choose. Atheists pick and choose, Christians pick and choose. So then I would say, hopefully we're picking and choosing things that allow us to co-inhabit with each other and not try to attack each other's families.
So the line of demarcation for you is, if there's a passage in there about killing, discard it.
Well, conversely, you got to have standards. So it's like, I think we talked about this episode in Little House on the Prairie, when 3 bullies came into town, and the Walnut Grove is a bunch of Christians. They're universally Christians, 100% Christians. And here's these 3 bullies who are like taking advantage of them. At some point, the town said, no, we're not going to put up with this. So they went in between the town, they tossed the bullies out. The kids, one of the brothers was in the school, and the 2 adults So the kids threw the kid out, and the adults threw the adult out. So at some point, you got to have standards. So if there's somebody who's just absolutely gonna hurt you, then you got to do what you got to do. I mean, you and I were in the military, so we trained for things like that. But yeah, so at some point, you might have to defend yourself. But at the same time, I also think that some people are talking like ISIS. They're like, we got to just get rid of them because I'm scared. When you don't have to. I think sometimes we needlessly start descending into wiping people out as if they're diseases when it really shouldn't be getting to that point.
Do you think there's a proper place for death in a society? Necessary?
Well, yeah, right. If someone's trying to attack me, I'm gonna defend my family as best as I can.
Okay, and then also in a legal sense, like the death penalty or something.
The thing about the death penalty is that I think it's traumatic. If you take part in killing somebody, even somebody who's awful, it's probably something traumatic. I know some warriors who are like, okay, I'll take the trauma. If it's going to get this guy off the map, I'll do it. So, maybe take advantage of people who are, eager to take part in that. But then again, some people aren't going to get better. And I'm not optimistic or naive enough to think that everybody's salvageable. Some people are just going to be dangerous. And if we have to lock them up, put them in a situation where they can't ever leave, then, we'll do that. So,
okay. Final question for me, and then I'll zip it. So when it comes to our question that's on the table, does Christianity lead to a kind of cultic mind control? It seems that we would need a clear line of demarcation in terms of when it's okay to bring about death and when it's not okay to cause harm, because I know you've emphasized, and I agree with you, that there's radical behavior that does lead to violence. Right. But when we're talking about a cult versus what is not preferable, how do we differentiate between, that's just a cult mentality, a blood cult of American democracy or something, if you're in the military or whatever? I'm just being facetious a little bit, but where is that standard? Because getting back to your discussion about chemicals, it just seems like if survival is the end. I know there's no teleology in evolution, but if somebody's just trying to survive, and killing somebody would heighten that survivability, and it's just all a matter of chemicals, I don't think we can really morally stand in the way of that individual who's just functioning along the lines of his extra chemicals that are telling him to do that to that person, whether it's in a cult or individually. Like if I'm being harmed, self-defense or whatever. How do we know that we got the right chemicals in our brain and we're going down the right road?
I would say, I've heard people say this before, like, if the Nazis were just trying to survive, then who are we to stop them? Well, they would be coming for us too. If we were not ready to line up with the Nazis, then we would have to defend ourselves. It's just like a team of bad people coming into your house. So that's your line, is that they're trying to attack you and keep you from living your life. So in which case I think you have to step up. And then I also want to say that for all the people who say, well, I don't have an objective standard to stop them, so until you give me an objective standard, I'm just going to sit here. No, you won't. No, you won't. If somebody's coming after you, all your philosophy and all your, like, I need an objective standard, go out the window, and you'll pick up the guns and you'll come with us just like everybody else when your life is on the line. So there's a philosophy of what's the standard, and then there's the biology and the reality of I'm actually got to do something now. If I don't do something now, I'm gonna die, and I'm gonna have to watch worse things happen to my family. And I think natural selection is going to be like, for all the really smart philosophers who are going to stay there with their arms crossed and waiting for an objective standard, you're going to die, and then everyone else who's willing to defend themselves, you're going to be able to keep having babies. Is that awful? It could be, but that's the reality. That's the world that we live in.
Okay.
I had a follow-up on that. So the last little part was clarifying a lot of questions I was having, because it was like, I understand your moral outrage on things that you read in the Old Testament, and back to the is God a moral monster, or the God that's portrayed in the Old Testament. But then you had the chemical conversation. So morality is not objective; it's apparently subjective, based on chemicals, more chemicals than merely if I like chocolate or vanilla ice cream, but it's just a chemical imbalance.
Right.
And so
I agree with that.
So then, kind of what I guess I just said this. blow up.
That was a sign. That was a sign that you're speaking the truth.
Yeah,
Hell,
God's
went
on
off
my
to enlighten
side, you
us.
see. So so the issue becomes, is it really? And I understand the last part of what you said to Daniel too made sense to me. It's simply, the question's moot because at some point the biology is going to kick in and you're going to just pick up a gun and kill him anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. If you're looking for an objective standard, at some point you're going to do it. But that just seems utilitarian to me. I mean, just because that happens doesn't mean it has a foundation. How do you ground that morality? Is it really wrong objectively to kill babies for fun? I think we all assume that it is, but it's just a chemical. Some people don't have that chemical. I happen to have it. You happen to have it, but a lot of people don't have that. Baby killers don't have that chemical process that we have.
Right. When it comes to torturing babies for fun or killing babies for fun, the very first time I heard that was from Josh McDowell in the 90s. He was giving a lecture, and I've always asked. In fact, I went to an apologetics conference with his son this past weekend, and I wanted to ask him if his dad is the one who made it up, because that's the first time I heard it in the 90s. But when I heard it in the 90s, I was like, probably what they needed was something that wasn't in the Bible, because you could go after atrocity, and then there's probably something in the Bible that could be maneuvered to be that atrocity. But torturing them for fun is not. There's no verse of that for the Bible. So there's finally something that we can use as a universal, no. So that was my take on that. I'd be interested in who came up with that and why. But that's why I think that
J.P. Moreland in Scaling the Secular City mentioned that, and I read that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was 87. So then I read it and forgot about it. So I'm glad to hear that. Maybe he was the one then. That let Josh McDowell off the hook. So in terms of like a chemical to make you harm a baby, I don't know that we evolved to do that for fun. I'm sure maybe it's happened, and maybe people get caught up and do, and then there's mental imbalances. But I can see chemicals telling me to defend myself and defending my family. Now I agree that people like ISIS and the Nazis are like, our chemicals are telling us to go town to town and wipe people out who don't get on board with us. And our history is filled with times where that happened, where someone said, we're coming through and we're going to make you do what we want. You're going to become our resources, or it's going to be even worse for you. So I realize that there's
what makes that wrong though? Or is it wrong?
Well, for me, it's wrong because I don't want that to happen to me. But is that who cares? The thing is, if that's going to happen to me, I'm going to defend myself. And maybe I'll have some friends who are going to be like, well, until you can give me an objective moral standard, I'm just going to stay here. Those guys are going to get killed, or they're going to become the resources of the
let me track your argument better. So if God in the Old Testament says to destroy all the Canaanites, kill men, women, and children and animals, and so that's reprehensible to you, that's obviously immoral, that statement. How do we know that? Because I have a chemical balance that's different. And so is it an objective? I'm back to, is it an objective? Because when you were defining it for us, you said it may be universal, but it may not be. So universal, what I'm looking for is objective versus subjective. Is it just like the flavor of ice cream, just more chemicals involved?
Well, and see, I get the allure of objective, because if it's objective, then we all would have the same answer. We would all understand, like, okay, we just can't do that because we can't. That's alluring, but I don't know if that's a real thing. I wonder that people come up with their moral and epistemic framework, and then their mind says, no, it's more than that. It's not just the result of my circumstances. It's not just my own analysis. This is something higher than me that I've discovered. I'm enlightened. I've discovered this, and now I need to tell other people about it. I think that's human nature, more so than there actually being a moral and epistemic framework that's objective. Now, that being said, there are true facts about reality that we have to know. Like if we're trying to grow plants in the ground, we have to actually, do the right processes to get to it. So there are true facts about the world. I don't know that morals are one of them. And if they are, it might just be because if we don't do it, we die. And then if we die, the thing about natural selection is that it is a moral monster because it doesn't care. Natural selection is like, you're either going to be here or you're not. So if we don't have some sort of system of morality where we, try to, in some ways, take care of ourselves and other people, If we don't have something like that, then we won't exist. So maybe natural selection is made it so that we had to develop some sort of moral sense. And then some of these
Classic
groups
pictures of that is like it's hard to see how our moral framework has evolved to that degree. When you look at the natural survival of the fittest, you're reminded of the old,
right.
animal eating animal in the Serengeti. And so this survival of the fittest means that everything else gets killed. But we don't think that is, oh, well, let's develop a moral framework based on animal behavior and predation in the Serengeti.
Yeah, it's actually three things. So self-interest is one thing. So, and this is one thing where people are sort of have a limited view of evolution. Self-interest is one thing. So you do have the people where the most violent and the most merciless kill each other and the strongest wins. But you also have cooperation. So you have things like 3 lions who are nowhere near as strong as the alpha lion, but the alpha lion is killing all the babies and doing whatever he wants. So the 3 lions outcompete him. And this was like with the Walnut Grove. There's 3 bullies who take advantage of our niceness, and they're all self-interested. But us cooperating, we can throw them out of town. So there's self-interest and there's cooperation, and then there's a third thing that I call zealotry. And zealotry is like the ants. An ant colony, each ant is not thinking about its individual self. It's thinking about the queen or the colony. And if it's not thinking, it's just chemically compelled to do whatever it can towards the colony. So if you talk about like individual ant rights, they're non-existent in the colony. They will do whatever they can for the queen and the colony to such a degree that they'll kill the kids. If one of the females has kids and she's not the queen, all the ants will stop what they're doing and go kill those kids because they're not the queen's kids. So something like that evolved in us as well. So it's not just self-interest. You got self-interest, cooperation, and zealotry. And it's that zealotry that I'm saying leads to this terrorist stuff and this cult stuff. But at the same time,
is cooperation just another type of self-interest, group self-interest?
Well, I think in cooperation, you are literally thinking about the other person. So think about, like a mom doing something for her baby, love between families. You're just feeling like being able to put yourself in the other person's position. So I don't think it's always self-interest. You can make a case that no matter what, you're doing something for self-interest. But in my view, if you're doing something that costs something to you, then it's more like cooperation or zealotry. So I think all 3 of those things are part of evolution. And we're just, instead of feeling this tension between good and evil, we're feeling this tension between self-interest and cooperation and zealotry.
Brady, do we have someone else next? Is Jake the next one?
No, we actually, Ken had asked a question that I think would probably be a pretty short question for Richard to answer.
That one may be classified, I'm guessing, but yeah, that's a good question though.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing which specific ideology, and you can name names, or cult or personality currently poses the greatest threat to societal well-being in the U.S. today, in your opinion.
No, I don't think. Here's one thing that I think we're good at right now. If one group gets too big, the other groups will stop and work together. So like there's group A versus group B, and then around them is group C, D, all around. And then group A gets so nuts, and I think this is something like this happened not too long ago, that some of the other groups were like, okay, stop. We're going to ramp up over here just to kind of equate this. So I don't know that there's something. I don't think there's any group right now that has the power to make everybody else their automaton, to make everybody else become their resources. Maybe a country like China eventually could do that, because one thing China has is they have social media working for them. Like our social media is all working for each one of the organizations, and they're all kind of at odds. But in China, the social media works for the government. And so as you're going to the store, if you're a citizen in China, as you're going to the store, if you have a bad attitude or you're saying the wrong things, social media will be like, hey, watch out for this guy. And then you go to a store and suddenly you're not welcome. So you have to change your behavior in order to be in good standing with the authority. So something like that could happen here. I don't think the United States is in that position yet, but
TikTok.
We should be watching out for that. We should
TikTok.
be watching out for anybody having well, TikTok is right now. What I think TikTok is doing is getting our attention. So far, it hasn't made us loyal to anything except for just our attention. But something like that could absolutely happen. Technology could, a group of a small people could use the technology to control more people. Right now, I just don't know if that's. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm on a delay. Sorry, but TikTok is banned on government computers here in Texas.
I think that's a smart move because they're owned by China, and right now China is using TikTok to watch us. They're not trying to control us. So, and all they're telling the algorithm is, all they're telling the algorithm is just show them things that keep them lured in, and it turns out that it's actually controversy. Controversy keeps us lured in more than what you would think, because you would think like, kittens or pretty people dancing, and all that does, that is alluring. But controversy is what really keeps people not only tuned in, but we start doing our own research and we start building, moral and epistemic frameworks to try to deal with this controversy. That actually is really luring us in. So I think countries like China are watching us and trying to figure out how they could use that to their advantage.
Do you think social media?
I know that Daniel suggested that perhaps our greatest existential cultic threat could be Taylor Swift. Is that possible?
Well, right now, that's the thing where, so I think
she's very nice. I shouldn't have said that.
I think both Trump and Taylor Swift had something similar happen, which is that a surprising number of people, what happened was like a surprising number of people resonated with them, the more than you would expect. And then as soon as that happened, it created a counterculture. So it's like, okay, this person's popular. Okay, I hate him. And so then now you have these competing pro this person and anti this person. And so I'm not saying that Trump and Taylor Swift are the exact same kind of people, but I think neither of them expected to have this happen so quickly for either one of them. Whether they mind it or whether they're, taking advantage of it, that's a whole other thing. But there's something about us where once somebody becomes an icon, there's a counter icon movement to say like, well, we hate them, and maybe it's deserved and maybe it's not, but that's something about human nature.
Richard, we talked about on the interview, we talked a little bit about social media. And I like what you said about the controversy keeping us glued to the screen. I talked to some kids at UTD last night. Kids, they were adults there at school there. And I mentioned the Galileo affair. I said, that's a 400-year-old viral video between Maffeo Barberini and Galileo. And I said, the reason it's lasted is because there was a conflict. And people like to sort of define and interpret that conflict. But we talked a little bit in the interview about social media technology. How close would you say, or how similar would you say that the way we interact on social media is leaning toward, never mind Christianity for a minute, how much do you think social media is directing us toward a kind of cult mentality that leads us to denigrate, maybe not harm each other, but to at least verbally denigrate, malign, and be sarcastic and mocking and all that? How similar is the climate of social media today, like a cult? You see a lot of people acting, saying a lot of crazy things.
It's doing two things. It's doing two things. It's doing that thing that I talked about first about increasing the tribalism. So that if you join a group on social media and you're like, okay, I'm with you guys, but I don't hate those other guys, then social media is pressuring you to step up your game, because you're going to have people in your own group saying, well, you're not really one of us then. In fact, you might even be with them if you don't hate them. So social media is pushing that. But something else is happening too, which is people are getting into the hate. They're like, I hate this and I love this guy and I love this guy and I hate this guy. And they do it so much. And then this guy devastates them. The guy that they've held up as an icon devastates them. And they're like, now what? And then they kind of lose their identity. And then they're like, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to, the next person who replaces that icon, I'm not going to get on board. And then if you hate me, you hate me. So some people are learning their lesson. And I think humanity is a cultural trial and error. And so I do think social media is making us worse, but then from that, some people are learning. So that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to push the other way, is to say that, I think some people are just going to get sick of it, and then they're going to find pages like mine where we're not doing that. And they're going to say, hey, I think I'd rather do this. And I don't mind being called a traitor or weak, and I'm just not going to do that anymore. So I think both of those things are happening. I don't know which one's going to win, but I think both of those things are happening.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Richard, when somebody
go ahead.
When somebody is in a terroristic organization, religious based, is there a psychology? Is there a treatment? Is there a mental health plan? Is there some kind of way you get somebody who's physically dangerous? They're ready to strap the bombs on. They're ready to drink the Kool-Aid, whatever. What are some steps? First of all, is that person potentially redeemable? And what are the steps to help them walk them down from the ledge? What's the process?
What I've found and what I think is that when you become either in a cult mindset or a terrorist mindset, where you love something or love someone so much and you start hating everybody else, and your brain, like I was saying before, really forms around that thing, so that you're not just your brain's not just making decisions. It's almost like your brain has built itself to only do that. I don't know that there's a way out of it other than you have expectations that don't happen. So like a lot of people who are in those situations, the reason why they back out is because they put everything they had towards something and it backfired on them. And then the shock kind of woke them up. But the more people pressure them to say, hey, please come out of the cult, please, 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 the more they just dig in. So I don't know that there's a way to get people out of it. I do know
that, like QAnon, that once you're in, there's no way out.
Well, and some QAnon people do break out. And one thing I tell people is that I don't know exactly how to get people out once they're completely dug in and their brain is going that way. But one thing you can do, people can test themselves right now. Is there anybody or any label that you cannot criticize? Because I've had somebody who would only would only give accolades to this one person, didn't matter what he did, and would only condemn this person. And there was no activity that this person could do where they could get credit. And there was nothing bad this other person did where he would be condemned. And so I would say, try to look in your brain. Is there anybody that you just cannot criticize? And is there anybody that you can't condemn no matter what? And if there are, look into that. See, because we're all humans. So if you agree with me that we're all intrinsically corruptible, then there shouldn't be any person that has your automatic loyalty. And if anyone's saying you need to be automatically loyal to me, that should raise your suspicion. And hopefully you don't go too far down that road. And I'm not saying to, like in an election, I'm not saying vote against that person, but I am saying if someone's saying you've got to be loyal no matter what, that should raise alarm. So just to yourself, think, is there anybody that I can't criticize? And if I can't criticize them, why not? Is there something physically going on with me that I need to stop? So that would be some sort of an inside test I would suggest to people.
We talked about this briefly when we were first talking about doing the book club, when I was talking with you about that. But being a Marine, are there some parallels between indoctrination, cultic indoctrination, and what happens at boot camp, what happens in the training method, maybe with Absolutely. All the armed forces, but for some reason, in my mind, the Marines are way ahead of the rest of the military in this area.
Absolutely, and they will overtly tell you that that's exactly which one's secret, which one's not secret. I always get covert and overt. I shouldn't have in the counterterrorism world, but yeah, they will tell you plainly that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying we're trying to get you to stop listening to yourself and listening to the authority and blind obedience to the authority. And fortunately, my dad, who went up in a military school, and a lot of people who knew me prepared me for that. So I sort of had like a Gomer Pyle mentality where they were yelling at me, but I understood what they were doing, so I didn't take it too personally. So I was able to keep up. So I did it for 10 years, but I still remained very diplomatic. I didn't have the Marine mindset. I was very much a diplomat, which actually ended up being valuable to them because there was times where they needed somebody who was a diplomat. So there were times where I would be fussed at, but then I was needed. So I would step up to be more diplomatic. But yeah, the Marines is very much like stop thinking and obey. And there might be times in our history, there might be times where you need people like that. And so, I know friends who went down the rabbit hole, but at the same time, man, in a gun battle, I was glad they were there. So I can't condemn them. It might be good to have some diversity in a culture where some people are willing to take that on and shine at it. I wasn't like that, but that's not to say I'm better. But yeah, the Marines very much encourage that kind of thinking.
The Marines are the only true cult.
Well, yeah, and then hopefully one thing the Marines have figured out is that it can't be about a person. So if there's a corrupt person in charge, and that's happened, I'm not picking on the Marines, any organization of humans, you've had some corrupt people, but he can get replaced and then another person can come in. So this loyalty to an office or loyalty to a concept is also something the Marines teach, which I think might help you not be so much of an occultic mindset. If you realize the person holding the office is making it more about themselves and you replace them, then I think that actually could help you not be an occult.
I think we might have a question from Ken. Were we finished with you? I might have stepped on you. Did we get the rest of your question out, Ken?
I was just going to say page 116 of Scaling a Secular City.
Thank you. I haven't read that book in 30 years, so I'm so glad to hear it. Now that might be the origin until somebody tells me otherwise. In fact, if I ever meet J.P. Moreland, I'm going to ask him.
Yeah, could I just ask one other thing or make another comment regarding a conversation earlier about being diplomatic and I really enjoy hearing, was it John, what was his last name?
John Moreland?
Yeah. That you all were talking about.
Morehead.
Yeah, talking about sort of an ecumenical or kind of a common understanding among people and having dialogue, and I really enjoy this group. One thing that I struggle with, I'm just going to lay it on the table, is to me there's like a huge dividing line between people who believe in eternal damnation and those who don't. It's like, how can I even have a respectful conversation with somebody who adheres to or gives fealty to a creator, a God who creates a system in which the majority of sentient creatures that he creates end up suffering eternally, maybe even very light suffering, but it's eternal.
Right.
How can I have common cause with somebody who thinks that I might actually be one of those people who could end up in a situation like that?
I kind of enjoy, I meet people like that, and I kind of enjoy pushing back on them, because what they do to me is they try to say, I just want you to really think about how serious this is and how awful this is. And I'll take that and I'll push it back on them and say, okay, so now imagine me going through that, or imagine someone else going through that. So one thing I do is I push it back, because they're legitimately thinking, just like the person who thinks we got to kill these babies because this ideal is so much. They're thinking this ideal is so important that everybody who doesn't follow it at my level deserves to be, taught that was wrong. And there shouldn't be any mercy there. It should just be awful for them. That's their should and their ought, and that's their primary thing. And they're probably, I assume they're going to die that way. But at the same time, if they're trying to lovingly prod me to remember that this could happen, I lovingly prod them right back and say, that this comes with consequences. Ideas come with consequences. You think you're teaching me that, but you should probably think about this too, because you're actually talking about families getting broken up. And so, like, my wife and I, she's a Christian and I'm not, but we don't teach our kids that. We tell them that there's people who believe that way, but we're like, we will never be in a situation where we go to some good afterlife and you don't. That's not something that we believe in. Maybe it is like that, but my take is that we could have been created by some sort of warrior God that's like, it's going to be my way. I don't care whether you like it or not. If it's that way, then that's just the way it is. We just have to deal with it. We're being bullied and we just have to deal with it. But we would never preach a kind of religion where, the mom and I would go to some paradise while they stay suffering forever, and we'll be okay with it. I've heard people say, well, I'll be so in love with God that it won't bother me, and I'll understand that they have made their decision. There's nothing like that in our family. We don't talk anything like that. And I do think that kind of language would scare kids. And I was, in my family, I wasn't raised like that, but I was raised in a community like that. So I'm kind of grateful that my parents didn't talk to me like that, but I did know families that did. And I do think that can be traumatic, but I also understand why it happens, because they're so loyal to this idea that it seems right to them that people who aren't loyal to that idea deserve this type of punishment.
Jake, you had a question about critical race theory, I believe. Tim, are you still with us? Is this Tim?
No, it's Jake Plummer. Oh, no,
sorry.
Jake Plummer had a question.
I'm sorry, Jake. Jake had a question. Never mind. Is Jake still with us?
Yeah, sorry, I'm still watching. I'm a visitor today. No, just the question I had was with in terms of so my background is chemistry. We're talking about brain chemicals here. So my question I want to kind of ask with this is, if we have these chemicals in our brain, they keep us doing moral actions. They make us do the things that are best for thriving of humanity. But let's say you've got your Ted Bundys, you've got your Jeffrey Dahmers, who, there is they're obviously missing some chemical, have less of that chemical. Something is wrong with their brain that they think this is okay. Can we honestly prosecute them under the law then? After all, they're just missing part of that chemical. So, I mean, isolating them, yeah. Well, but then we're making a moral judgment that they're doing something wrong, and we're putting them in prison or worse. Is that something we should be able to do? Because hey, they're just missing part of that chemical, or they maybe have too much of another chemical. How I'm interested in answer and see how Richard deals with that. Please go ahead.
Okay, so my answer here is heartless, because here's the thing: if we don't stop people like that, and even if they're perfectly helpless, the chemicals just make them do it. And even you could do the same thing for free will. What if we don't have it, and our experiences just propel us to do whatever? So what? If we don't stop the people who are going around killing people, then we're not going to live. Just like I was saying before about self-interest versus cooperation versus zealotry. If we don't do something to stop that self-interested person who's just going through and destroying things and not investing into the community, then we got to stop the behavior. And so if you made a philosophical point to me that, hey, it's just chemicals and, his chemicals tell him something different, so what? That's the way it is. And that sounds heartless. But if we don't do it, then natural selection is going to be like, hey, guys, go ahead, let the guy do whatever. Meanwhile, this society over here is going to keep flourishing, even though it's just chemicals. I don't know what to tell you. The thing about natural selection is you're either here or you're not. And it's heartless. It's a moral monster. It's like it's A or B. You're either here or you're not. So we got to do it. People who are like that, if we can find a way to cure them before they do something too damaging, wonderful. And hopefully neurologists and anthropologists can figure out some sort of way to help people catch it in a way that's loving and not devastating to them, keep them from engaging in that kind of behavior. Maybe technology, maybe our phones will be watching us so much that there'll come a point where we can't do something like that. Whatever. If you don't stop the behavior, then society's not going to make it. And you can say, well, by what right? By the right of existence. And maybe that's, maybe I'm the moral monster for saying that, but I'll stand behind it. If it's got to happen, or you're not going to make it.
Well, we are about out of time, so let's just do that second video if we can, that 1 minute one, and then we'll wrap up and say our goodbyes. So Dan, can you do that for us?
Mm-hmm. All right, ready to go. Oh, I gotta.
That guy before Jake, he's military too, so I want to throw that out. He served his country as well.
Why does so much evil happen? If I was able to have an answer tonight for the problem of evil, hey, I win a Nobel Prize, and I'm sharing it with you.
Boy, I have trouble finding it out, but I have to just live with the tension. There is evidence for Christianity. That's what my fellow atheists get wrong.
Was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ the greatest evil in the history of the world, or was it the greatest blessing in the history of the world?
What changed these disciples from, their leader had died. This thing should have just been done with.
Those who are interested, we will post that up on our Facebook at the Atheist and Christian Book Club, or Friends of Atheist and Christian Book Club. One of those. We'll post the video up when we're done with it. We're still working on the Q&A. We were only able to take 3 or 4 questions at the end, and so we're going to do a special podcast where Bill and I and Brady and Daniel get together, and we will try to answer all the questions that came in that were texted into the meeting. But had a good time. So did you want to say anything on the way out the door? Bill?
Great job, Dan.
Oh, I thought it was fun. I have the Steven Spielberg version, and then I did a Texas two-step version. It's a little silly. It's silly.
Well, I want to say thank you so much, Richard, for being our guest speaker at the Atheist and Christian Book Club. I hope that the day comes where we can have you back in as a guest author as well. But if not, we could still do this again on another topic. Thank you so much for being part of the club, and look forward to seeing you in person one day.
Thank you, and I hope to be able to, even though I don't have a book, I hope to be able to dial in. I've dialed in as a guest before, but I like to be as much a part of the club as I can.
Thanks so much. And until next month, April 4th.
We need you. We're running out of atheists here, so.
Yes, we need to have more committed atheists as part of the club. Thanks so much,
especially
Ken,
one that's
participation.
Fair and balanced.
Yes, like Paul.
Yes. And we will see you guys on April 4th. Stay tuned.